Hello, Bible readers. If the Psalms are the little Bible because they summarize the whole thing, then the first Psalm must be as important as the way Genesis begins, in the beginning, right? It sets a tone for the whole 150 Psalm collection. But to get at what that tone is, I want to explain a few things about how we come to understand what the first Psalm means on its own, as part of the creation Psalms, and as the tone setter for the whole Psalter. I know that's a weird word, Psalter, but the Psalms, that's a way to refer to a bunch of individual Psalms. It's also known as the Psalter, which is a more collective noun, and I like that, so I'm going to use it sometimes, not all the time. Anyway, Brueggemann organizes Psalms into three categories: orientation, disorientation, and new orientation. Pretty memorable. He likes these terms because they reflect life. Our lives have seasons of well-being. You know, the times of life when things are going pretty swell. God feels reliable. God's creation is functioning like it's supposed to. God's law creates justice for you and seemingly everybody else. Psalms of orientation are psalms of thanksgiving, gratitude, goodness, joy. Everything's hunky-dory. But that's not always how life goes, is it? Our lives also have seasons of hurt, times when we feel alienated. We suffer, we see death. These are times when God may not seem reliable. God's creation does not work right. The law that is meant to order things fails. These psalms include feelings of rage, resentment, self-pity, and hatred. Some are known as lament psalms, where everything is not hunky-dory. But we also know, and this is the third category, seasons of life that are not only one or the other. They're not only either orientation or disorientation, right? Some seasons are more complicated than that and different than that. People in relationship to God also know our lives experience surprises, times when joy breaks through the lament, the despair. Unforeseen gifts come from God. These are psalms of new orientation that affirm a powerful God who puts humankind in a new situation. Brueggemann says the life of faith expressed in the Psalms focuses on two decisive moves of faith that are always underway. And I love this part. By which we are regularly surprised and which we regularly resist. Isn't that the truth? So there's these three categories, which means there's two moves. A move from category 1 to 2 and one from category 2 to 3. Let me explain. The first move is from settled orientation into a season of disorientation. These are typically lament psalms that go like this. Everything was fine until the thing happened, God, and it felt bad, God, and now I'm mad, God, and question you, God, and everything else. It is such a distinctively Jewish thing to do, to use words that hold nothing back. They're not afraid to lay blame at the feet of their God, but also would never imagine addressing any other than God. It's not like they give up on God because they're fed up with whatever is unjust or disorienting and then just like move on to some other God. Instead, they lean into their one God relationship, bringing all their frustrations to their one true God. And by shaking their fist at God, that act in and of itself is a form of worship. The other move, though, is from disorientation. So if lament brings us from orientation to disorientation, the other move is from disorientation to a new orientation, surprised by a new gift from God. From the pit of chaos that we thought we'd never escape, we're delivered. Being freed from slavery in Egypt is the obvious Old Testament experience that the Psalms are drawing on. Jesus crucified and then risen would be the obvious New Testament experience of despair, being met with salvation that Christians can connect with, like Jews connect with God through Psalms. But here's an interesting truth. Whether the move that's being made is a loss, plunging us into disorientation, or a joyful surprise, both are unwelcome at first. Brueggemann says our culture is organized to prevent the experience of both. Keeping things the same is stability, right? And that's the path of least resistance. It typically has fewer upfront costs to just keep doing things the way they've always been done. So loss or surprise, when people of faith make any move into disorientation or into new orientation, we're doing something countercultural because we're not remaining unchanged. It is an upstream endeavor, and it is done in faith, and it is done with God. So welcome to Psalm 1, the first psalm of orientation that begins our upstream countercultural work that's going to help us name both loss and surprise. These psalms build on each other and will help us understand both of these moves. We'll become more familiar with the loss and the surprise over the next few months. So within the big three categories, orientation, disorientation, and new orientation are, of course, subcategories. I'm going to try to not make this more confusing than it needs to be, but Psalm 1, as much as any orientation psalm, assumes that some things are settled and beyond doubt. God is knowable and known, reliable, trustworthy. Life is not troubled or threatened in an orientation psalm because the world is functioning as God intended. Harmony. Nothing but harmony. Brueggemann says these psalms are expressions of creation faith. That's the subcategory that I was talking about. And creation faith has nothing to do with any theory about how the world came to be. That is not how the Bible thinks about creation. Creation faith is a belief that God's goodness is experienced as generosity, continuity, regularity. Chaos is not present in a well-ordered creation. Like winter always comes. Summer always follows eventually. Winter always returns eventually. Right? So theologically, a psalm like Psalm 1 is there to simply praise God, to thank God, because everything's hunky-dory and works like it's supposed to. But there's a social function too. When a community prays or sings Psalm 1, they're reminding each other that there is a givenness to rely on. God guarantees it. And if that doesn't exactly meet the realities of a community's moment, a psalm like this can at least provide a point of reference, like a community can remember, this is how things are supposed to go. So maybe we say Psalm 1 to remember what we hope for, that there will be a day when we can sing about a protected, chaos-free community that functions like God intended for it to function. So Psalm 1, orientation psalm, we're feeling good about God and the world. Creation faith psalm, God's goodness is experienced within the predictability and reliability of the seasons of the year where stuff just grows and feeds us and gets birth and it all just works out. But Psalm 1 is also, importantly, a Torah psalm. You know, sometimes we talk about a good relationship requires give and take. Well, through the Torah, God and Israel are in a give and give relationship. God gives the law. God's people give a faithful response to that law, obedience, with gratitude. Psalm 1's all about how blessed are those who joyfully obey the law, the Torah. The wicked, not so much. There is no middle ground in Psalm 1, no ambiguity, and that's why this psalm comes first. It sets a tone. It would have been used in communal worship, and the message is the agenda of our worship life is obedience. How we live our lives is decisive. Fix your life on Torah expectations. Live God's way, and you'll experience happiness and well-being, period. It's kind of like how you'd teach a very young child. There are sharp either-ors in this life. There is no whatever in Psalm 1. Now, at its worst, of course, that this comes across as naive. If you're in a chapter of life that's less than hunky-dory, it might feel shallow or even misleading, but its primary point makes it worthy of being the first psalm, and this is the primary point. Happiness or blessedness does not come from a life that is self-determined, but comes from one that finds a home in the teachings of God. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.